Sorry, man. What are you saying?
Yeah, it'll record away. I you can record. There's no problem recording away. But I was kind of thinking you could probably edit this out if you want or whatever.
I'll
But like
just
if
I'll just edit all of this out. That's all
oh
right.
yeah, grand yeah. But if you wanted to do like there's a couple of points you raised there on the thingy, but I was thinking to do a proper job on it. I'd want to do a little bit more reading on Stafford Beer and Co. You know what I mean? To
All
give it
right.
a bit of I don't know, try and do it justice.
What we can do is we can do just a talk on some of the things you brought up regarding that black box. And
Yeah,
I thought it was quite interesting that Enid Mumford. I didn't
yeah,
really.
she's very interesting, man.
Yeah. Oh,
Very
she.
interesting.
Yeah, I haven't looked
Yeah,
into that
Enid.
at all.
Enid as in Enid
Enid.
Blyton.
Enid. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So Enid, like this is all brand new to me, so I need to do a good bit
Mm.
more looking into it. So, but Enid Mumford, like point number one is Stafford Beer and the Manchester Business School.
Yes.
So, like,
Yeah.
I have a hunch that Stafford Beer's, what does he call it? Ideal system or perfect system or whatever it's called,
The viable system model.
viable system model is a very key core fucking concept to this whole story.
Hmm.
Because I just have a hunch that they either directly use that system or an edited, abridged, modified version of that system for the current global control system. As grandiose as
Mm.
that sounds, I think they've actually. I have a hunch that he hit on something big, like really big. And he hit on some sort of a natural engineering model that understands how people function in society.
Hmm.
And used it like as the thing is he went down to Chile with it. The then president invited him down, got in contact with him and said, listen, we're aware of your work, we've been following it, and we've got a team of scientists down here and we want to implement it in Chile. This is in kind of 1970 kind of direction. And you get his name online there. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but beer starts going up and down to Chile from London, like literally transiting up and down, and they build up this system. And the model the model is a kind of a, I don't fully understand it, but the basics of it is it's like an infographic type of organizational system that you could deploy in a workplace, for example. And incidentally, that's where a lot of Enid Mumford, right, was ran through the Manchester Business School. And one of the interests, like Enid Mumford did a lot of studies on the workplace, on workforces. So she did papers on, for example, beauticians or dock workers, and they studied the behavioural ins and outs of how they organise and the whole shebang. And it ties in. She's tied in a little bit with Tavistock, I believe, and it ties in as well with some of the old school British military psychological thinking was married in as well. So what you're looking at really is a whole academic um, school of thought and research that was based around human organization uh, and in different types of organizations, such as military, industry, and by default, society itself. So at some point, are you still there, Silas?
Yeah, I'm listening to
Yeah,
you.
I'm
Yeah.
just yeah. At some point, Beer devises his system. The president of Chile gets wind of it, likes it, invites Beer down with a view to implementing it. And I think it's stage 5 of the system is the top of the system, the senior management,
Yeah.
the president, etc., etc. And
Hmm.
as Beer says in his interview, I went down, explained the thing to the president below, and he said, I was about to tell him this, and by the way, stage 5 is the top, and I was about to say, that's where you are, Mr. Presidente. And the president interjects before Beer could get the word out of his mouth, and he goes, stage 5, yes, he says, that's where the people go. So that's when he said that he signed his own death warrant, I reckon.
Yeah.
That Chilean president. That was a bullet to the brain
Hmm.
from
Allende.
CIA, Nixon. Exactly, that's him.
Allende. Yeah.
Now,
Hmm.
the bluffer's guide to this is I was in a band recently. we tried to set up a bit of a garage band with a dude from Chile. So I do be texting him back and forth. A very nice fella, like very genial, nice bloke. Like, and he's often texting. He's gone back home to Chile now, but he's often text over and go, "How's things?" and blah blah blah. But I just got wind of this story, and I texted. I said, "What's your man's name? Alimande or something? Is it
Salvador Allende.
Lende?" It's like, no. You there, Silas?
Yes.
Sorry, just 1 second. Let me get this guy's. Make sure I have this guy's name right.
It's quite interesting. Allende, Allende.
Yes.
But it's quite interesting you brought up that he,
Yeah, that's
obviously at level 5 where it's theorized where what's called psi or literally algorithmic regulation by algorithm. That's where that's supposed to be. Therefore, the decision making is
yes.
entirely done by algorithm.
Yes.
And he states that it's the people. Well, funnily
Yes.
enough, he was ousted, the Salvador Allende, the socialist government of Chile,
Yeah.
from, I believe, I think it was 1971 to 1973 or something
Yes.
like that.
Yes. Yeah.
But he was taken out on a military coup on
Correct.
September the 11th,
Oh.
1973.
Okay.
September the 11th,
Yes.
1973. Very
Yes. Yes.
interesting. And obviously,
Yes.
Cybersyn was abandoned then, and
Yes.
that famous operational room was destroyed
Yes.
as well.
Yes. Now, again, I'm only just getting my head around it, but as you say there, you see, in the original, are you suggesting there that in the original design, stage 5 was to be occupied by an algorithm, or are you suggesting that's currently what's in place globally?
No,
Just to be
no. I think theoretically Stafford Beer was moving in that direction.
oh, okay.
You can even see that from some of the talks that he gives.
Oh,
But
okay, okay.
within this sort of primitive model, which it was extremely
Yeah,
primitive in 1971 to
yeah,
1973, you had that operational room, which was essentially what would you call them? The commissioners
yes.
would control that, but they would base all of their decision making on the process data being fed to that operational room and to subsequently the commissioners who were sitting
Mm,
in that seat via the algorithm. So the algorithm was essentially providing them the data. Think of it like Plato's cave.
yeah,
The commissioners were chained to the post,
yeah.
and the algorithm was projecting the shadows onto the cave wall. So
Mm,
in essence, it was a system controlled by algorithm. Um,
mm,
so the only next logical step of that is to totally automate the system to uh, ensure to abolish the commissioners and to
mm.
ensure that a system it's abbreviated as SIRI, but it
You're right.
literally is regulation via algorithm or
Mm,
legislation via algorithm,
mm.
where essentially the algorithm develops, it creates laws, rules,
Yes.
policies, what have you,
You
which
see,
mhm.
yeah, but like, you see, Beer is kind of in the dock here on this one a bit, like, and I've seen a few comments on videos already about him, but like, I would plead innocent until proven guilty with him. I have a hunch he worked on a given system that was not necessarily benign or nefarious. It was just a system. Now, depending on how you implement it, you can use it to crush society into something, what we have now, or you could use it as probably your man was trying to. Ironic name, all end. Allende was using down in Chile,
Yeah,
ostensibly, seemingly to use it for kind of a social benefit of society. So the system itself is just a machine, essentially, that needs to be guided by that stage 5 occupancy. So your man is a socialist view, Allende. I want the people in there. I want, what they want for Chile, what their vision is for their country. They should occupy that space in as much So he's trying to enshrine a democratic socialist, if you will, even though that's a poison term. But basically, what I'm trying to get at is something that's for the people, by the people, toward the people, in insofar as is possible. And that was one of the things actually separately that I read about Beer's system. He tries to assign as much freedom to each level as possible, so that the system itself is functioning as freely as possible. But my 2 cents hunch on it is that Allende tried to adopt the system literally for the people. They crushed him, and what you have now is, that, as you said, they have taken the bones of the system and have implemented the algorithm at stage 5 or level 5 or whatever it's called. And I reckon that's what you're looking at now. Something like that. And in order, like, your one Enid, there was a quote there from her, I flicked it on you on the email. And this comes up again and again with SRI, for example, changing images of man. That kind of infamous text that have you heard of that, Silas?
It rings a bell, yes.
Yeah, you should. I'd flick you on a thing on it. It's another big text in this kind of corpus of thinking. But changing images of man, one of the contributors to it was that guy who wrote that eternal, what the fuck is it called? That eternal cycle of the hero warrior that he traced this thing through all mythologies.
Ah, yes, yes, yes.
On something or other.
Yeah, I
The
know.
myth.
I know what you're
You know what I'm
talking.
on about?
I know what you're on about. Yeah,
Yeah, he's one of the contributors.
forget the
It
name
was
now.
an academic text that was written basically in the I think like the early 70s, and it's kind of a core conspiracy theory textbook because it's coming from, it was Stanford Research Institute who were behind that, and they're a biggie on the they front. They're one of the academic kind of fronts for what we're talking about. But the concept, and this I marry this back to your one Enid. They have this kind of a concept that when technology changes, society also has to change, kind of thing. And changing images of men was a way to sort of market this out into, justify it out into academia and probably into intellectualism. In that, we'd say each age, the medieval age or the Stone Age or, you know, the Industrial Revolution, there was an image of man, a projection that was the everyman, shall we say, of that age. And the argument, as from what I understand, one of the core arguments of the text is that we need a new image of man in order to usher in, justify, or harmonize with the new forthcoming age of technology. So they're trying to create this, what do you call it? Golem, not golem. What's that word? That Hebrew word where they create that
Like
egregoric kind of.
a clip art, like an egregore, a
Yeah,
husk.
exactly. They try
Yeah.
and create this thing on the hill, a structure, a carving of the image of man to come, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and it's a sort of a quasi, it's a stealth justification for moving the shape of things on in order for you. See, a lot of this shit, when you can justify this stuff at academic level, at intellectual level, that you move it down through society from there.
That's it.
It
Yeah.
goes from there into your Department of Education, etc., and it eventually ends up with teachers and textbooks, and that's how you roll the thing on. But why I'm going back to Enid? Enid basically, and I gave you the quote there in the email, said that when you come up with a new technological system, it can only adapt insofar as the human element, the population, are able to deal with it or comprehend it. So the kind of subtext in what she's saying is, if you come up with technological advance X, and let's give it a rating between, say it's between 1 and 10, it's at a rating of 9 of adaptation. That your human population also have to adapt to level 9 to be able to cope with it. Otherwise, it's dysfunctional. So the subtext in what she's saying is you actually have to adapt or socially engineer or make ready the human population for the new technology. So that ties in with what I reckon was a good deal to do with the Great Reset and the so-called, coronavirus lark was part of that. modifying behavior modification to cope with the new system. And I think, like a lot of her research, are you with me on this?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So a lot of
I was gonna tie that in with eugenics. It all
yeah,
intersects really, which is controlling the evolution of man, controlling the form
yes, yes.
of man. Absolutely.
Now it also ties in with Steiner's stuff, theosophy and Freemasonry, and in the esoteric sort of tradition that the I'll try and dig up the lecture again. It was either theosophy had to make ready Freemasonry for its new
Mhm.
fucking overcoat that it was going to have to don. But the underlying point in all this stuff I'm talking about is that there's an underlying parallel, a kind of an underlying thinking of technology moving and society having to move with it to change.
Yeah.
So it's tiny bit into it, that kind of negation and
Well,
the negation thing
well,
that
that,
you're
oh no, absolutely. But it also goes back to that Zohar quote
yeah,
regarding, we shall raise a tower of precious stones that shall never again fall as it did. I believe that's
yeah, yeah,
Schlechlacher 137
yeah,
in the Zohar. So again, the tower is a metaphor for the hubris of man, which is typically exhibited within his technologies that he develops, which
mm,
are an extension of firstly his intellect,
mm,
and secondly his innate sense of divinity.
mm,
Um,
mm,
and that's all really exhibited within the technology that he produces, and not just the technology that he produces, but in the way in which it's applied to
yeah,
the external environment. So
yeah,
what you're seeing now, and especially with that, what that implies is technology is it's the most valuable thing to them. It's
yes,
not society. It's not human resources. Nothing regard. It's basically they have this idea of this utopia that they desire. For us, it would be a dystopia. But in
yeah,
that utopia, it's a fully automated system in
yes,
which the human resource isn't really required at the level it is now. So everything you're seeing, it's all going algocratic,
yeah,
or a control by algorithm, simply
yeah,
because, as I stated, the only way they can control this utopia, which would be at that point a literal dead society, is through algorithm, is through a change in image of man, of which man becomes an almost undead husk.
yeah.
And the reason that
Homo
needs
Deus.
Homo Deus, yeah, absolutely,
Yeah,
the bastard man. And the reason that has to happen is because that takes man out of the loop of entropy. If,
yeah,
to provide it a term,
yeah, yeah,
decay, death,
yeah,
um, to permit their position of power to continue indefinitely. Now,
yeah.
I'm not saying it'll work. It's,
Well,
but that's what they're
just
seeming
before I
to
pick up
go
on your
for.
point, right? One other quick note is back to the Frenchman who was the advisor to Mitterrand and these guys um, studying, what did he study? Insects, or what's this dude's name, Silas? He was an academic senior presidential advisor. His brother actually was
Attali,
CEO of it. That's the man, Atali. Good
Jacques
man yourself.
Jacques Attali, yeah,
Yeah, Atali has this going
entomological
on as
studies,
well.
yeah.
Now, Thingy has spoke about this Jessam guy, that channel, and he's a very obscure. Jessam guy is a channel on YouTube that just basically dissects texts, texts, and two of the ones that he looked at are Changing Images of Man and Atali's book, which A
A
Brief
brief
History of the
history,
Future.
yeah.
So
Brilliant, yeah.
Atali's thing again ties in with this concept of the technology, the society changing around. Now they have different terminology for it. The means of production, for example, or the technology. There's a bit of a drift in the actual terminology, but it's all to do with change in and around technological movements, and that all big shifts in civilization and human society are around technology. So this is the big X factor, the big elephant in the room, the thing that's staring us in the face is the fucking is the data. But just to go, what was just the point I said I'd go back to before I brought up Atlee? Oh yeah, here we go. Right, says you right now. Beer's thing is feedback, and there's a quick quote I put up there from YouTube. It's only a 3-minute video, even 1 minute, and he shows a model of an engine, what looks like an engine, and there's a flywheel with an expanding kind of a hinged ball bearing affair, and it's a flywheel, and as the engine spins, this the fingers, if you will, with the centrifugal force, throw out these fingers with ball bearings at the end of them, and that causes extra mass and extra resistance in the engine, so it stops it from speeding up too much. So Beer has shown this thing, and he's like, right, that's feedback. He said, forget about a system, he said, and this is where I think it's genius and where it ties in with what we're on about. He said, forget about a system being controlled from without. It's controlled from within. And this is where the data comes in. The behavior, if you can loop, basically you're getting the people in the cave to keep themselves in the cave. And they figured out a way to as crazy as it might sound, to engineer this to keep the system moving. So as used for this autopoiesis kind of scenario, perpetual motion machine. Now, how exactly that works, I haven't fully got my head around that yet.
Second order.
I beg your pardon?
Second order cybernetics. I believe we're in the third order cybernetics now. So first order would be, I believe, that would be like Norbert Wiener, Jack von Neumann, or John von Neumann, pardon. Second order would be Stafford Beer, the likes of those, a few others. Third order, God, I forget his name now. He's a Belgian cyberneticist.
Yeah.
Anyway, third order cybernetics has this. It's similar to the viable system model, but it's in some ways similar to what Enid Mumford is talking about, where man literally changes, and there's a lot of definitions of it, but it's called meta-system transition.
Wow.
Where it's the same thing. It's that same idea where you literally remake the man, if you will, into a control mechanism or a control function, which is the term. And like the ball bearings, they all act regimented, and they're all obviously a standardized weight, and they permit really that, for example, the combustion engine, to act in an autopoietic way, or to have homeostasis, meaning there's a regulation of it by that said control function, and there's a control of the volatility that must be inherent within the system for it to thus generate motion. So inevitably it gets back to this cosmological understanding that you have a centrifugal and centripetal force, and for existence to hence exist, to for it to, in the initial state of or prior to the beginning of Genesis, existence coming into being, you had the source, then it had to self-react or self-divide, then that generated chaos, it generated motion, it generated division, which hence generated existence. So in essence, it's like order ab chaos, that Masonic saying. You need chaos to thus have form, to have the material world, to have existence. But within that potential for life is also the seed of life's own destruction. So thus, what cybernetics seek to do is to remake man to thus control that seed of destruction and to just have life. But the problem is with that, if you just have life, it can no longer be life at that point, because life requires the contrast of death.
Yeah.
Thus, you have to turn man into a limbo creature and put him into a limbo state,
Yeah.
to basically to artificially loop around
Yeah.
the inherent constraints of life and death, um, in essence, to control the chaos. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
cybernetics ultimately is. It's the control of chaos, like everything. I mean, all of the
But
various secret
he
societies. Yeah.
Beer predicted, and I sent you a little snip of it there from one of his papers, that, and as he was selling the system, or advocating the system to the Chileans at the time, that in certain scenarios the structure would collapse. It would be an
Yes.
unviable, or what's the word? Not a viable system, and
Yeah.
it would collapse in
Non-viable.
a
Yeah.
non-viable, and it would death, or as he
Yeah.
literally used the word, it would end in a kind of a death. So, like, if you can argue cogently, coherently, that the current that this is, if you can expound or delineate or kind of identify this structure somehow, even
Hmm.
to theorize that it does exist and this is the scenario, A, and B, show as clearly as you can that it's not viable, and the reasons, particular reasons, it's not viable, you'd make a very, very um you know coherent argument, and kind of, I don't know, a kind of very politically empowering argument for people to try and understand it, if you know what I mean. That's, just because you're laying it out on the table. It's nuts and bolts stuff at this stage. It's mechanics. It's like looking at an engine. The timing belt is stretched too tight, and the fucking pistons, the steel on them is weak, and you're not getting the exhaust fumes out there quick enough, and there's not enough lubrication. It's going to hit the deck, at some point, like. Anyway, I don't know where I've forgotten where I was going, but I just think it's very fascinating that like, she's the study too, that lady, that Enid. I only just came across these people today, like, and the thing is, some of them are tied in with Tavistock, but the second you say Tavistock, you kind of poison the whole argument, because Tavistock is a
Yeah.
conspiracy trope, and it's like a cliche. The second you say, "Oh, he's on about fucking Tavistock," and everyone just goes, it's like when you say Kennedy, everybody just glazes over because they
Yeah.
just heard it, or 9/11 or COVID. They're like, to be avoided at all costs, because they focus the attention away from the bigger picture, even though they're critical things to understand in their own right. But I think
Certainly. Yeah.
myself, that you should try and, as much as possible, steer away from them. Because if it's Tavistock, you see, if Tavistock gets defunded and the door is closed, that's the end of Tavistock. And but that's not the end of the idea and these concepts and these intellectual movements. So that's why I think, it's very important. I'm only just, like, I reckon possibly this is the core stuff, as you say. You can tie it back into the mysticism, the Kabbalah, the Zohar, all that stuff. But to marry it back down so below into the everyday world, where is this stuff manifesting like? Because you see, a lot of people are not,
Hmm.
unless you can tie them two things together and show them both, then it's extremely powerful. Otherwise, it's too arcane, it's too esoteric, it's too difficult to. And I think that's where a lot of people are getting confused, or they're getting a bit. They're looking.
Hmm.
Actually need a little bit of guidance on it. Say, look, at guys, this is real as well in the tangible, concrete, everyday world, and here are the examples. Here are the academics behind it. Now, as you say, I remember the point I was going to say now. They're just suggestions, Silas, by the way. But and I know you know that stuff yourself. But anyway, moving forward, as you say, you have the system. Now you have to put man into the system, but you have a problem in that man has got natural law inside him, and he's got a fractal of the divine inside him, and that's all extremely inconvenient for the system. So this is into the remake. Before you get to Homo Deus, you have to have. Fuck, I wrote this term down. It's a Latin word that means the setting sun. I've written it down at work somewhere. It's another word in place, Deus. But anyway, you need to sort of the Negredo thing. before you get to Homo Deus, let's just call it Homo Negredo for now. You need to blacken
Putrefaction.
him. Yeah, you need to bust him down, and this is where
Hmm.
Lacan and Georges Bataille
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
Foucault and
Hmm.
postmodernism and your Willie is your fanny and vice versa, and you're a boy or you're a girl or you're both or you're neither, or you could be black or white, or your society, like everything is inverted. So that's part of what that is. So now you don't, you're not putting a regular man into that system. You're modifying man. You know what I mean? Now, when you marry that together, now you've got a system. Let's assume, you know, the ideal. What's he call it again? Ideal system. My head isn't working the same.
The viable system model.
So you have your viable system,
Hmm.
right? You have your man remade, or at least partially remade, or partially deconstructed. 2 and 3. You have fucking data, endless data.
Hmm.
So now them 3 points alone are a heady fucking brew, like, you know. And I reckon they saw the writing on the wall. They knew this stuff was, you know, the best minds in the world were on this stuff, like, you know, post World War II, probably through World War II. They knew
Absolutely.
exactly what they were doing, and they have had like serious, like, you can imagine presiding over, like, just one tiny example. There was a guy beside me playing music the other night, and he's a former Shell Oil guy. He's from Brighton,
Oh,
English
very
gentleman,
interesting.
like. Yeah, I was chatting away to him, and he says we have £3 billion going through our treasury on a yearly basis with Shell.
I know.
Three
Yeah.
billion quid.
Hmm.
Anyway, I hinted on to him a little bit about the centralization of power, just to try and get a feel around where his head was. Oh, he goes, look, I heard a lot of that stuff. He says, I don't believe that at all, because it's too complex. He said to centralize power in the world, you'd have to get past the Chinese, and you'd have to get past the Russians, and you'd have to get past Iraq and past all these different. So in his head, the presentation of information to him is, he reckons, robust and legitimate. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
It's
It's
kind of like when you meet people. When I meet people now, I have to analyze them rather than argue with them. I have to sit back and go, "Oh, okay, yeah," and see why are they thinking the way they're thinking. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But
no, no. That brings up a good point actually, because funnily enough, the Tavistock Institute of the full term for, or name of it is the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. Now,
mm,
funnily enough, I'm pretty sure within it was either the 50s or the 60s, the Tavistock did several signature projects. What I mean by that is, um, they called them that, but they essentially they were PR campaigns,
mm,
or to manipulate the consumers. And I
that's right.
believe one of the companies involved was Shell. Funnily
Wow,
enough,
wow.
um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. Actually, that rings a bell.
yeah, I remember Alan Watt bringing up that point. But I mean, this idea of it's the Chinese or the Russians those are abstractions. They don't exist. What he may be referring to is the the self-contained interests, right, that are within these national institutions that we call. You have a central bank, right? When you have a centralized fiat currency creation system, when you have that, you have a monopoly. Monopolies, by their definition, converge all interests to them, because
Mm,
competition to a monopoly is sin. Competition is birthed by competing interests or a
mm,
divergence of interests. So at the highest level, no matter the hierarchy, at the highest level, all must converge to that single point of the monopoly.
mm.
So, just to refute what that individual from Shell is saying. Uh,
Well, you see, the other
mm,
side of the coin is he's right. Based, you see, he went on. He was an absolute gentleman to talk to. He's here in Ireland for a year. He's obviously retired, um, and he's playing flute, learning Irish trad. He was gent, like, but he
mm,
said, he says, I get all my information from the Economist. He says, I read the Economist. So he's been fed mainstream information, and they've created this edifice around people that they cannot
Yeah.
penetrate. You know,
No,
so
but they believe themselves. I know individuals that read The Economist. For my ex fiance, her brother he worked in a hedge fund, and I mean, you
mm,
couldn't talk to that guy about anything, even though he was
mm,
trading in government bonds, and you couldn't say any. You couldn't mention to him about, the absolute scam of the derivatives market or anything like that, because he had been to university, he got the degree, he's now a made man in his eyes. So you're speaking to people that have really inflated egos at that
well,
point, and that's the problem with qualifications in many ways.
yeah, but I dare say, you know, a certain amount of self discipline is now necessary, because
Mm,
essentially you're dealing with
mhm,
sensitive information that's outside the public domain, and
certainly.
it's out, and one needs to be, and this is directed at myself as much as anyone else, and I'm trying to get myself to do this. One needs to be disciplined when you're talking to the public and understand. Like, there's no point in one saying to oneself, "Well, it's taken me 5, 10 years to fucking detangle this mess and get some clue around what's going on," and then expect a random member of the
Certainly,
public to be
yeah.
on the same
Yeah.
page. It's completely ludicrous thinking. Like, one needs to be calm, reserved, and try and learn from the person. Ask them, okay, what do you think? And they think
Mhm.
X, and then why do you think X? And at least try and garner something from them. Why? And it's like an observation thing. Why have you arrived at that point of thinking? Why? Like, there was a girl, another session there last night, I think it was. We played in Limerick. This beautiful girl. She's Portuguese, and she's playing fiddle. And she looks like an elf, and she's such an amazing fiddle player. This one, oh my God, she said, what will we play? And she says, look, we'll just improvise. And off she went. And we had this other Mexican kid on the guitar, and she just could just pull it out of thin air, man. This girl was just jamming like. But anyway, long story short, I happened to see the graffiti on her fiddle case, no creativity in a world which is destroyed, or something like that, she had written. And she's a climate change activist, you know? So, and I get chatting to her, and she says she feels very anxious all the time. That's something I picked up, and very confused. But she's adamant that she's out to kind of change things, and the climate is high up there. She's a self-proclaimed activist. So it's like, you can see this stuff is affecting people in real time. It's an amazing fucking phenomenon that we're
Oh no, certainly.
confronted with.
It's a doomsday cult. She's part of a doomsday cult. But it's not to detract from her as a human being, as you're saying, she's an
Well,
amazing
you
fiddle
see,
player
this
and
is the
such, but
impossibility of it. I mean,
yeah,
we're being very diplomatic. I see your man there. Yeah, what's his name? Juxtaposition. He said, "I'm living in an episode of the Twilight Zone. I'm surrounded by zombie people, or stupid zombie people."
mhm,
So, but I suppose it can be very frustrating. But see, if you try to analyze it from even a quasi-academic, or I suppose put it this way, if you were to fully understand the complexity of what's involved,
that's it, yeah.
you would never underestimate the psychological position of a member of the public. Like, you'd be treating them like
Mhm.
as if you were, as if you were a shrink, and someone coming to you with a psychotic break, asking you what should I do, how do I deal with this, And I think we actually need to be trying to deal with it on that level, with
I,
a certain amount of discipline.
well, I think as well that it's really telling as to how this will all end. Because as you're saying, the complexity of it all and the complexity of human beings, to try and unravel the psychological and dare I say psychosocial baggage that
Mm,
they've you, you know sort of bore from the culture that they've been immersed within. And of course this culture is totally controlled, and the likes of Tavistock, even the Club of Rome, and all of the various think tank
mm,
incarnations that have come from them, or iterations rather. So what you're seeing is because we don't have a control over the informational environment, vis-a-vis control of the media, and thus we cannot saturate the informational landscape and thus create the environment people dwell within, or the culture, if you will. We don't really have much control. We can wake up individual people, but we can't control we can't steer the collective. Thus,
No.
we can't fully steer the ship. And again,
No.
cybernetics, I mean, it comes from a Greek word, kybernetikos, which literally means to steer, or the steersman. So we are not the kybernetikos of this vessel of civilization. And this is the problem. This is why... This is in essence, this is why it can only end with the destruction of the ruling class. The ruling class has to destroy itself, has to fling us against the jagged rocks, for then people to realize, for the survivors to realize, oh my God,
Yeah.
that's the total problem with the situation. But I think it's always ended like this. I don't think you can... It's a cyclical thing. You can't really alter it a great deal, but you can help yourself, and you can help the people, the immediate people around you. And of course, there are always outliers. That's why we're here talking. There's always outliers seeking the truth. But like that individual there, she's always anxious. She's in a doomsday cult. I mean, and people look back on history and go, "Oh my God, weren't the the religiously minded, the zealots of the Middle Ages, weren't they just absolutely insane? How could they think like that?" We have them right now. We have people that are as feverish and as zealous as individuals within, who were burning witches within the 14th and 15th centuries, and 16th century for that matter. Individuals who were, who sent their children on a crusade, right? Individuals who went on crusade, with nothing, no shoes, nothing. This individuals who thought throughout the ages that Jesus was coming back, or in the Islamic world, I believe the 13th Imam was nigh, and the world is about to end. Or within the Jewish religion, you had the likes of Sabbatai Zvi, right? Within 1666, you had everyone engaging in sin, proliferating sin, believing that was the road to redemption, believing that, the Messiah was nigh and Armageddon was about to befall upon them. How's that any different from the secular society we dwell in now? You've got individuals who believe we'll all be dead in the next 5 years, and then when that doesn't come, they push it ahead 10 years, and then when that doesn't come, they put, it's insane. I mean, that isn't the only secular cult. You have other secular cults where they're literally mutilating their own sexual organs as some sort of weird quasi virtue signal, which is that's a religious act. It's a religious behavior. So, it's this is the problem. You're trying to unravel all of this labyrinthian cultural labyrinth, this labyrinthian maze, if you will. What's the word? Baggage, propagandistic baggage. It's just it's very difficult, and this is what they've done. It's really, they've sown the seeds for the meta transition, but they've also sown the seeds for the artificial collapse of the civilization, which is required to thus bring about what's called, I believe, eusociality, which is the emergence of the highest form of what they believe is, in cybernetics, is social behavior. So the highest form of it, which would be like a beehive, a hive mind.
What did they call it? Oh,
I'll get the term.
yeah. Yeah.
I believe it's eusociality.
It basically means like hive mind.
Yeah, it's the highest level of organization of society, which
A Borg.
is Borg, yeah, cooperative brood care. So that idea that you've seen today, where you don't own your child, the child is owned by the community. You have
Mm.
overlap in generations within a colony of adults and a division of labour into reproductive and non-reproductive groups. And then it goes on. I mean, there's multiple It basically is the Borg. It's the hive mind. It's collectivism on steroids.
I
But that's
think
metas. Hmm.
where the likes of yourself are doing a massive favor to the public is in an erudite manner to explain, you know, how have we got here? Where are we at? What's the actual landscape right now, and where is it going? And what does it matter for the individual? Like when I think myself, right, looking at it outside the box, when they listen to Silas or a commentator, they're looking for someone to give them a sense of anchorage or a sense of explanation or delineation of the world around us because it's intensely confusing. So they're looking for someone who can just lay it out a little bit and say, "Look, this is it. This is what it is." And the person who can speak that, and that's why I think you've resonated to a certain point, is that you are, he who speaketh truth shineth forth righteousness. You give off that resonance. One does when one is on the money with this kind of stuff. But there's a huge market, if you'll pardon the expression, there for people. And the more confusing and smoky the thing gets, the more they really want to know what's going on. But like for example, it's taken me so long to figure out, and I was talking to Thingy the other night there, Preparata, like that concept that they disappeared the head, like there is no evil government, there's no new world order sitting up there, there's
Hmm.
no dictator, there's nothing to be seen anywhere, there's no police, there's no nothing. So it's gone. So you don't have to fear anything. And like it's only when he said, I was like, fuck yeah. Because we spent so long. Who are they? Where are they? And it's an embarrassing question because you can't answer it. If someone says, Silas, well, who are they? You're talking about conspiracy and all this stuff. And who are they? Who are you on about? And like, once you realize that, you can say, well, it's a good question. And I bring you to the point that you're actually right. There is no they.
Hmm.
And then you can present the argument in a kind of reverse punch manner. And you can say to the individual, well, look, for every other single civilization, empire, organization, nation state, you had a clearly identified Führer, president, head of the party, whatever it was, you knew where the seat of government was, you knew who their military navy was, you knew, and for the first time in history, you have no clue. There's nobody there. And no one
Yeah.
bet, you can make them feel a bit, how do you answer that? Like,
Oh, absolutely.
and
It's
you
a
can
crypt.
present the kind of counter argue it back to them in a kind of, because what I'm trying to say now is a little bit
Mhm.
about schooling, about trying to teach people or trying to present the argument in a robust manner, like,
Oh no, certainly. It's a kleptocracy that
Yeah,
we live with under, or a crypto oligarchy, whatever term we want to use. But it's hidden.
yeah,
But really, this comes with technology.
yeah,
And one way in which technology is primarily used, though we don't really notice it for obvious reasons, is that it is utilized to hide power. Power is incessantly attempting to hide itself, right?
yeah,
Now, what I would argue, even in the medieval era, or even prior to that, even in the ancient era, the classical era, even the
mm,
mythological
mm,
era, the era that's sort of shrouded in, by the passage of time, the true power existed, or was vested within, secretly, firstly the priest class,
yeah,
and those were typically the advisor class.
mm,
Now, the advisor class has always been really governed by merchants, the merchant elite, and of course, those comprise primarily the financial elite, the bankers, and what have you. So, really, that's where the real power lies. But most of the kingly line is merely, it's a mask to power in many ways. But in this age, you're absolutely correct. It's a headless state. I mean, even in the, officially as well, it's there isn't really anything there. Of course, for example, in the US, Biden doesn't rule anything. We could even argue the bureaucracy doesn't rule anything because as we saw through the lockdowns, that the bureaucracy stopped. It was that everyone was locked down. They were in their homes. Everything really ground to a halt. The bureaucracy wasn't there, and yet everything really went along as business as usual for those 2 years. So there isn't really. It's an illusion that we live under. It's an elusive economy, or an illusory economy. It's an illusory system, and power itself has veiled itself in illusion in many ways. So it's a bit like that biblical quote, I believe from the New Testament, where it states, "We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities." Now, those powers and principalities, I don't think it's a supernatural thing. What I think they're referring to is an archetypal force. It's that demiurgic force, that force that seeks to control chaos, that seeks to become the creator, right? The creation who seeks to become the creator, who seeks to leap from the canvas and, steal the paintbrush of creation, if you will, who seeks to, don that mantle. That's the
Like I'd
archetypal force.
interject there. I would
Mhm.
make the point that the whole idea, in my view at least, anyway, must remain political. So to pick up on your point there, as above, so below. That the manifestation, like the archetypal stuff and the primordial forces, are absolutely, in motion, but they have a manifestation. You know what I mean? So, like, for my 2 cents, I would take the time to elucidate that point in talking to the public or talking to people, because I don't think, it's not everyone who can grasp that really. And it might sound obvious in some ways, but it's difficult to grasp, if you know what I mean, in some ways, for a lot of people, that you can tie these greater forces back down into power in the world, and concrete power in the shape of force of people, armies, banks, you know. I think you've dropped out there again. Are you there, man?
Oh no, sorry, I had myself on mute. Yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely. I totally agree with that.
The
I
reason
agree.
I'm bringing it up, Silas, is I think it's a worthy point of making, because you see, when you have the two sides, like,
Mm-hmm.
the order and, above and below, it just, I think it hammers it home a lot more. Like, as you say,
Yeah.
I hope, I don't mean to sound critical of what you're saying or anything. I hope I'm not, but I feel it's something that needs to be, hit home, because essentially the reason is, it's to maintain the political energy of the analysis. Really, I think is important, that people can become politicized a little bit around these things. So it's a lot more easy to become politicized around a power that is the actual
Mm-hmm.
manifestation of something that's, an archetypal force.
Yeah, it's deeply rooted within the species. Yeah.
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 So, but insofar as is possible, if at all possible.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, just as a side note, then we're talking about the danger is, and like, there's a what you call, my mum did one of these weavings, what you call, with the needlework thing, and it's two
Yes.
deers at a stream in a forest, and one of the deer is obviously looking around because it's heard something in the woods. And I was thinking, you see, there's a couple of things to be thought about here.
Mm.
The power structure, ironically, are using nature, the power of deception in nature. They're using camouflage
Yeah.
in such an ironic sense. And in another sort of a, this is a kind of a possibly fascistic comment. Like the populace who are deceived by them, um, should die. Essentially, to put it completely bluntly, they're not essentially, perhaps you could argue, deserving of life
They're not
because,
essential. Yeah.
well, insofar as they
Mhm.
have not, the survival instinct has let them down, and they failed
Yeah.
to see the predator, and they're living in a kind of a plastic sense of security, and they have lost their natural instinct, so they're
Mhm.
not capable of surviving in the jungle. They're like something that was raised in captivity, and they're suddenly being released out to the wolves. They haven't a hope,
Oh, no,
and
certainly. Well,
for yeah,
just to add to that analogy really quickly, sorry to interject,
yeah, yeah,
um, they're very they have a plastic mind. They have they're smooth brains, right?
yeah,
This is what's happened. It's hyper domestication, or
yeah,
I believe we brought it up, hyper normalization.
yeah.
They're hyper normalized, literally.
Now you're into
Sorry,
obviously a
man.
very
Continue.
worrying self-reflection there, because you have to say, have I suddenly become the power structure? And in a sense, you have,
Hmm.
in a weird way, albeit as you say, two sides of the one coin. You're looking at it from a slightly different. But it's this worrying, yet seemingly natural idea that, that which survives and lives must have the capacity to defend itself,
Yeah,
to earn the right to survive.
that's it.
And that's an awful fucking thing to say. It's an actually horrible thing to say, but, and, there's a humane party who looks for an out from that
Hmm.
comment, but it's like, no, I don't find an out there. It's like, so back to the kind of the idea of the deer in the woods. The deer can hear something rustling in the trees because there's still a natural instinct in the deer that knows to look out for danger.
That's it. Yeah.
But what has happened here is that this power structure is using the stripes of the tiger. Did he who make the lamb make thee? That's the Blake quote from Tiger, Tiger, burning bright. Did he
Hmm.
who made the lamb make thee? And he's referring to the tiger. So he has made the tiger also, right? He has made this in a sense, if you know what I mean. But anyway, this is building up to a point. The system has lulled the deer into a false, not only lulled the deer into a false sense of security, where the deer now not only believes that there are no tigers in this woodland at all, not only that, but it has actually succeeded in deleting the concept of tiger from the mind of the deer
That's it. Yes.
altogether. It has
Hmm.
deleted that concept, and in its space is just a vacuum. They're probably putting a vape shop up in the space there, or a kebab shop or something. It's just gone. It doesn't exist. So that's where the public are at. Like, there is no such thing. There's no concept for what we're actually talking about at all. It's been completely deleted. So now, and I had a little momentary perverse insight into this myself the other day, and it was a little. I gave myself a little pat in the back. I'll admit to being a little bit egotistical. I said, "Fuck it." I got Silas to talk to Preparata. There's two fuckers that I think are smart bastards, and here am I behind the scenes. And I looked at a YouTube comment, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, and it said, "Silas and Guido, excellent to hear the two of you talk." And I just got a certain dark glee when I read the comment because I realized I'm nowhere to be fucking seen. This is
Hmm.
amazing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they must be kind of feeling that perverse sense of omnipotence because they're standing outside the whirlwind of all this stuff and no one can fucking see them. They're literally moving and shaping the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Duper's delight. They get
Oh,
a sense of Duper's delight. No, I believe me. See, when I play strategy games, even
yeah,
chess,
yeah,
and you're especially in chess when your opponent doesn't see what you're setting up, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 moves
yeah, yeah,
back,
yeah, yeah,
and you
yeah,
set up, you get everything, and they fall into your trap. I've done it in a few strategy games before as well, where you'll bait the enemy in, and then you'll unleash an ambush on them, and there's a certain level of delight in that.
Mm.
That I can only imagine it's, magnified tenfold. Of course, I'm not psychopathic. It's just a general strategy game. But I mean, what
Well,
what they're doing is it's like,
let's imagine for a second that, I mean, we throw these terms around these days: narcissistic, psychopathic, etc. But
mm.
there's a part of us that is capable of destruction
Oh
for
no,
survival.
absolutely, yeah. Uh,
Let's be honest about it.
in us, it's toned down. It's tempered by conscience, morality, and the long-term consequences. See, this is the thing. This is why the Faustian archetype always really crops up within the psychopathic elite, because though the psychopath is a long-term thinker, he's only a long-term thinker um, in so much as it suits his impulsive short-term base interests. So
Mm,
he doesn't think about the long term and say, does my environment survive? Does that which maintains my power and which defines my power, the human resource, does that survive? Does the society in which provides me the lofty position I have, does that survive? All
mm,
these seek is a very focused and narrow view of, say, power. How do I
mm,
maintain power?
mm,
And you could say that's due to their sort of hyper focus, their efficiency, their predatory instinct. I mean, the
mm,
predator is very similar. If the
mm,
predator has no control function, the predator will breed, and the predator will simply just keep on eating until the prey ceases to exist.
mm,
And this is what, and of course, within that ecosystem, then the predator dies or is reduced to a smaller population until the prey can then be either reintroduced to the environment or can bump up their numbers through reproduction, through
mm,
the various generations.
mm,
So it's this constant balance between predator and prey. So the
mm,
predator within a ecosystem may reach a critical mass, a threshold, but he survives vis-a-vis the prey. So there is that constant balance there. Now, of course, we have with our human predators and our human prey within civilization, you have the issue of now this idea of metasystem transition and all of these various complexities, right? The technology as well that goes along with that. However, it
mm,
always still comes back to that problem. If they create a system that's, should we say, undead, right, or is huskified or what have you, um, they themselves will not wish to huskify themselves, right?
mm,
So therefore, they will always still maintain within their own sort of innate nature, their unchanged nature, that impetus for self-division, because they
mm,
still contain that fractal essence of the source or
mm,
natural law, right?
mm,
Which requires death and life and the renewal therefrom, right? Therefrom the mixture of the two. So,
mm,
I mean, you can never. It's that idea. I always come back to that Prince of Persia, the warrior within. You can never escape your fate. And people say, well, in that game, the prince does escape his fate. No, he doesn't. What he actually does is at the end, he dons the mask of the phantom or the shade. And what happens is he takes on this alter ego of that phantom or shade. He becomes undead. Then he goes back in
mm,
time and he gives fate, or what's called in the game the Dahaka, this
mm,
monster of fate. He
mm,
gives him his older self, which is
mm,
living. So, therefore, to survive, to break the loop of fate, he had to then become undead, right?
mm,
And kill himself in the past. So it's again, it's using a sort of video game for
mm,
as a a higher metaphorical, a higher metaphysical point, which
mm,
is you can never outrun fate unless you become undead, right? Unless you
mm,
become beyond life and death, which again, this is the idea of the Homo Deus. You become God at that point. If you're
Well,
beyond life and death, you're the singularity point. You're God, and
but
that
this is
poses problems as well.
this look. You're free. They're free to do whatever they want within nature. So they're free to create an unnatural system within nature. But nature still exists. Eternity still exists. Providence still exists. They cannot change those things. But they can manipulate man or create mess with man within that system. Now, do you get what I'm saying?
No, absolutely.
So like
What? Yeah,
it's like you can reshape the vessel, but the vessel still is on the ocean, sort of thing.
that's that. Yeah.
Now, if they're out of sync with the greater thing, they can't really mess with the greater thing because it's an intangible, like eternal thing, infinite thing. They're trying to re-engineer man within a kind of a Stafford Beer type system. But that vessel that they're trying to engineer, Homo Deus,
Mm-hmm.
must float on the greater ocean still. It must still float on the eternal ocean within the eternity of nature.
That's it. Yeah.
And the problem is somewhere along the line there's going to be an event horizon, a nexus point where
Mm-hmm.
the twain cannot exist in a harmonious manner. Something has to snap because they cannot, like, they would literally have to exist in an alternate dimension, a completely alternate creation. But
Mm-hmm.
the creation is intact. It's man. It's the attempt to re-engineer man and his surroundings. So it's the concrete. It's Jabalon, the world. It's the world of the, what did they call him in Gnosticism?
The demiurge, the
Yeah,
demiurgos.
it's the
Yeah.
demiurge. It's the concrete bread and butter world that they're messing with, like the
Mm-hmm.
everyday stuff you can touch and feel, and how man goes about his business. That to them is the extent of reality, perhaps, because well, that's not true to say that, I think, because they should be more than well aware of what's the greater. But so now you have sort of, there's an egg in the basket that has changed, but it's still in the basket, like. So it's to try and in the long term to think, well, what's the interplay of forces, and how do you project, where do you see conflict, and where do you see stuff cracking or snapping or imploding, and you have to draw a line off into the
Mm.
distance and see where something's going to hit something. For example, if they are a predator, a natural predator, and if they have engineered their prey down to some docile state, now you could say bastard man now has a bastard king.
Yes.
So so you become lazy, corrupt, and you lose your edge in a sense. And
Mm-hmm.
you've, even though you use nature, the camouflage and deception to get you where you wanted to be, to that apex position where the thing was revolving eternally beneath you, you've undermined some aspect to yourself. It's like, if you were to be king in the morning, and someone said to you, well, what kind of nation do you want as your kingdom? You'd say, well, I want poets and scholars, I want
Yes.
warriors, I want a robust,
Mm.
strong nation of, of great people who are huge achievements, and I'd want to let them really the fire. But that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for a nation. They're looking for bastard men,
Mm-hmm.
something they don't have to worry about. So it seems like, their achievement, where they're putting all the hedge and the bets, is on something that's really, how do you say, uninspiring, like.
Mm-hmm.
So it's at some, and yet all of that must exist within nature still. So it seems to me they're bound to get the thing is bound to hit the deck at some point, like it has to,
Oh
like
no,
in a fairly
certainly, yeah.
spectacular way.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Well, it says in the Zohar that, and this ties into some of the other theories that I had even previous to reading this within the Zohar. This just really reinforces that. Um, they state in, God, I forget where about in the Zohar now. It's in my notes somewhere. where that I'm paraphrasing. It states that human history is counted within 6,000 years or 6
Yeah.
steps, right? And that these 6,000 years are divided into 3 2,000-year eras, right?
Mm.
Sort of epochs.
Mm.
And but I found it interesting where it states that human history is 6,000 years. So,
Mm.
I mean, you look back at the Rishat structure as well, right?
Mm.
And that, from the geological evidence, there was a grand deluge there 12,000 years ago. So, therefore, according to the Zohar, that would be two human histories ago, 2 eons, human eons ago.
What's it putting them at? 2,000 year
Well,
cycles, kind of,
it's yeah,
or chapters.
it's 3 2,000-year chapters, which comprises the sort of eon of history of the human history of that point, right?
Okay.
Now,
Yeah.
so I think it ties into what you're stating, that it fails spectacularly, right? You have
Yeah.
3 of these, major failures, right? For example, the last one would have been the late Bronze Age collapse, which happened
Mm.
about 3,000 years ago. Pardon me. Yeah, about 2,500 or some years ago, right? Something like that. It'd probably be more along the lines of 3,000 years ago. But so you have these medium or middle of the road collapses. You have 3 of them. The last one is the spectacular collapse. So it's the irony of this all. The more they push for for technology to overtake human evolution and to control human evolution and to mitigate the human condition, so thus they can control society and thus maintain power more efficiently. The irony is that, like you said, human evolution ceases to exist when technology overtakes man's evolution, right? When we, as we have done, this is the problem with man, we vicariously push on our evolution, or we substitute our physical evolution vis-a-vis technology or the evolution of our tools, right? So as our tools evolve, that is where we channel our evolution, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is the problem, because what
Yeah.
happens then is the evolution doesn't happen to our vessel, it doesn't happen to our thought, our mind, our spirit. What is evolving is the tools. And
Yeah.
eventually the tools become, to a certain degree, owning us. They own us, they possess
Yeah.
us, right? And like a demon, like a
It's
digital
funny you should say
demon.
that now, because your one
Mhm.
Enid had a thing about that around the structure of organizations being formed around either the activity or the type of production they were doing.
Yes,
And it was some comment she had, and it ties in with what you were saying there, that the technology becomes the focus of the thing.
that's
And
it.
she made some observation, sounds very similar to what you're saying there. I only briefly had a look, but these are very, very interesting people, and they actually present their ideas are very,
Mhm.
very engaging, but they're actually very digestible. Very
No,
kind of all right,
but,
light bulb moment kind of stuff.
well, we
Fuck
we
yeah.
actually, you can even see it in our behavior. So, for example, you even have it to this day. Of course, we don't watch The Fire. We watch the TV screen, right? We have screens in our hand. That is a sort of echoing of our ancient history, where people at the end of their day would sit round the fire and watch the dance and flame, right? Where the sort of Promethean flame, the Luciferian light,
Mm,
becomes that which we are entranced by. We're like a moth to the flame. And what ends up happening is, like Icarus, you go too close to the sun, you're burned.
yeah, yeah.
And this is the problem. This is why human evolution always goes through these 6,000-year cycles, according to the Zohar. And as you're
Mm,
saying, it fails spectacularly.
mm,
By them seeking to control human evolution, and thus to sort of substitute the control of the human condition, and evolving man, through these technologies, through technology, and to have man controlled by technology, what ends up happening is man becomes little more than if the technology becomes a lion, then man becomes an ant in
Yeah.
comparison, right? Mentally, spiritually, and even physically, right? As we see robotics and everything
That's why I was thinking
advancing.
like bastard man, because I came across that term.
So,
William the Conqueror was also known as William the Bastard.
yes,
But I
yeah.
think in those days, I don't think they used that term like fuck off you bastard, like the way we would use it now. It was
Mm,
like a bastard meaning literally didn't know his father or whatever.
so,
It was a slur on him. But bastard man being that Hebrew word keret, Kareth, is cut off.
mhm.
Bastard man is cut off from the source, from father.
Well,
You
that's
know,
that idea of the death of man, the death of
yeah,
God, pardon. So the
yeah,
death of God isn't actually, in the Nietzschean tradition. Bataille had a similar idea too. I forget what he called it now, but it's similar to the death of God, where
yeah,
it's not actually the death of God,
yeah.
right?
It's cutting
But
off.
it's the cutting off. It's the death of the fractal essence
Yes,
within
yes, yes, yes,
oneself. It's
yes.
the cutting off, as you're saying,
Yeah,
that you become man becomes an island at that point.
yeah,
And on this
yeah,
island, he becomes the similitude of the dodo, right? And what ends up happening is the technology comes along like the voracious and insatiably hungry, insatiably starved Dutchman, right? And they become literal, prey that really has no resistance to the predator. And then you have a reset, a grand reset, not just a great reset, a spectacular reset, um, where we go back to essentially Stone Age tools, like the
mm,
cavemen. Makes you wonder, was were the cavemen just the sort of the grand reset of a precursor civilization? It's
well,
always crossed my mind that
yeah,
idea.
quite possibly like that. They were
Mm.
the what's the word for the outside the hive, the
Parabiosis,
parabiosis.
yeah.
Yeah, maybe a primitive version of it. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
That which survived. Quite possibly, like you could be looking going back millions or billions of years, God knows what, way back into the distance, and like even you're looking at a wheel then, but maybe there's even a bigger wheel where the whole thing goes around and just blown to bits or condensed into a single point, it implodes and then blows up again, and then you take that kind
Hmm.
of thinking and then you just layer it into infinite layers up or down, and you're probably looking at then what the thing might actually look like overall.
Yeah.
Like it's just absolutely infinite going off in either direction. So, but when you get into that type of thinking, all of a sudden, all what we're looking at right now seems completely insignificant. You know what I mean? It's like it's just
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
we're just this is a pimple on the arse of of something much much bigger, like But yes, this is the show in town too at the moment, like
Oh, certainly it's everything is, there is no end to it. I mean, it's similar to that idea of perspective drawn and the vanishing point. And I remember when, you know, I did game development when I left school. I did a college course on that.
All right.
And within it, we did an art module. Now, I'm an absolutely terrible artist. I got better on that course, albeit, but we were doing perspective drawing. And I always recall visualizing, they called it the vanishing point, but nothing really all that vanishes it's not the end, it's not the linear end. It's all that vanishes is one's perception, is one's knowledge of that point, right? Beyond that point, beyond the vanishing point. So really there is more to the vanishing point. It's just one's perception ends at that point. Now, it's similar to that idea of parabiosis, where, for example, after several generations post-dating the collapse of, say, a beehive and the migration of a queen, right, to another beehive, to create another beehive, rather, the drones who were produced from that new queen, would they be aware that, this queen has migrated from another hive? And you can go on and so on and so forth with that example. So
This
really,
is like Eve and the Elohim.
yes, it's you're what you're essentially. I mean, it's in every eschatology, every religious eschatology, every creation myth, but it's getting back to that idea of the precursor civilization, that we are merely just, it's another grand cycle, if you will, and then
Yeah.
it will collapse, end, and then another thing will take its place. It's like what the Zohar states it, where it's human history is within a 6,000 year eon or epoch or era, and then it collapses, or a tikkun olam occurs, a rectification of the world, and then the new era begins, the new 6,000 era
Tikkun
begins.
Tikkun Alam, is that it?
Tikkun olam, yes.
It means
Tikkun
the
olam, the world of
rectification.
the world of rectification. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And so I think that's really
And
was,
that rectifies good and evil, or the balance, the imbalance. It comes to a head, and the whole thing kind of
yes,
fucking.
essentially, or it resumes. The turbulence of the wave is mitigated somewhat. So it's, there's a lull in the storm,
And does
if
it
you
say
will.
that it's like the 6,000 year cycle? It says that in the
Yeah,
Zohar.
it says that. I forget the 6,000 year one. I'll get it where it is in the Zohar.
Ah, no, it's just even just
But
to have a rough idea. Because I heard you on that one before.
yeah,
Adam
it's
Kadmon.
Adam Kadmon as well. Yeah, the
That's in the
primordial
Zohar
man.
as well, isn't it? Is
That
that in
is
the
in the
Zohar?
Zohar. It's in the Zohar. It's in I,
Torah.
I don't believe it's in the Torah, but everything that's in the Zohar is essentially a rabbinical commentary on
Yeah.
that which is found in the Torah, which
Oh,
is,
okay. Yeah.
the Torah literally means the instruction. Now,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
would say
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
the instruction for what? Well, the instruction for
What does
essentially,
Zohar mean?
a well, there's several translations, but the majority state that it means radiance or light.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And by the way, with this, like the light, right? When the shit hits the
Mm,
fan, things get really bad. Eventually, the luciferic light, is
hmm
going to be given to. What do they mean by that? What does that mean? This Lucifer, like when you hear the Smithsonic thing, or like I'm not exactly even clued in on it, but like I
mm.
have this kind of vague concept that at some point in time, um, if you will, the shit hits the fan, and the whole thing breaks down, and people are desperate and on their knees, and then the Luciferic light is presented to people, like some sort
hmm
of radiance or essence of something. But what am I right in saying that? Number one, and number two, what is it as
Well,
such?
for me, it would totally differ from potentially what they think, but I don't know. It really, because a lot of these secret societies are compartmentalized. A lot of them don't really understand a lot of these things, too deeply. But then again, I might not, compared to the higher echelons, I might not understand it that deeply either. But for me, the luciferic light, the Promethean flame,
Mm,
is firstly underpins that notion that uh, what we've just been speaking of, that within man is that sort of demiurgic force, if you will, right?
Mm.
That can create grandiose things, but within that, uh, those sorts of grandiose contraptions, those technologies, these, you know, art, that man is an artificer, if you will, of these grand contraptions. But within that is man's seed of self ruin. So it's the idea of the fire, right?
Yeah.
That the fire itself is symbolic of the center of it all, right? That
Mm.
self division. That fire, firstly, is comforting, it's warm, it's warming, it is a life giving force when it's
Mm.
controlled, but it can also be used for a destructive purpose as well. So it's a mutual, it's a paradoxical force, right?
Mm. Yeah.
It's something that's both, a symbol of life and death.
Yeah.
So the luciferic light is that, right? That it is light is firstly, light is artificial.
Mm.
The thing that came first, if you read Genesis, if you read any religious creation myth, if you even just think about it, what had to come first was darkness, right?
Mm.
What had to come first was the subtractive principle, was the absence, right?
Mm. Mm.
Then came everything, right? So it's what I say, from the seedbed of nothing came everything, right?
Mm.
So from the seedbed of no material thing came every material thing.
Mm.
Um, so it's that idea of pure potentiality, undifferentiated and unmanifested. Because the
But
singular,
yeah.
sorry,
No, go on.
no, I was just going to say. So that's really what the luciferic light is. It's that thing which produces motion within existence.
So
Um,
is there some
mhm,
concept like in Freemasonry or Theosophy that an advent will come where man will be presented with this luciferic light, which I now take to understand to be an inner understanding of the machinations of chaos or nature, by which, as you say,
mhm,
can flip from a positive to a destructive force just with the click of a finger. That somehow the illumination or understanding of this thing will be presented to the chosen ones as such, or the elect, if you will. That's because there seems to be some commentary about that in Masonry or through Steiner. I think I
mhm.
vaguely remember him saying that it was one
Yeah,
of the functions of Freemasonry was to prepare man, or Theosophy perhaps was to prepare man for this moment where this concept around this energy will be handed
Ar-
to him.
Araman is slightly different. Araman is that which anchor. If I recall Steiner correctly, I believe he states it's Araman is Araman is technology, but it's
Mm.
that which anchors man to the physical world, right?
Mm.
The luciferic, um, that which is Lucifer is in sort of direct contradiction, or it desires to cut man off from the higher source, but it's in direct contradiction to that spirit, that divinity within man. Um, so I believe that's the distinction, if I recall Steiner correctly. It's in the Spirits of
So, so,
Darkness, I believe, that
so
book.
Lucifer is in contradiction to the divine monad
Yes,
as such.
because the divine monad is darkness. It's nothing. I mean,
But
this.
okay,
Mhm.
but the let's what term can we use for God? Can we use God? Is that just as
Pure potential, undifferentiated and
okay?
unmanifested. That's what I would
Okay,
say, at least.
okay. So is Lucifer in opposition to that pure potential, undifferentiated as such?
Yes, and yes, because Lucifer is artificial. The light is artificial. It's it,
Oh,
it's an illusion. It doesn't exist. It can
Oh.
only exist as a sort of a divided seed, a seed that's blossomed, right? When a seed blooms, it divides, it cracks, and then from it is a sort of Y-shape form. A Y-shape forms, and you have a bifurcation of that potentiality, that
Mm,
differentiation of it, right?
mm,
So the problem is, it will always, that which blooms from the seed is when the seed blooms, it really is. It's the onset of death, because as soon
mm,
as life comes about, death must also follow. Um, just simply because the seed was the singularity point. It
mm,
contained both life and death in equal abundance, and with the differentiation of it, with the blooming of it, the cracking of the seed, the springing forth of life, or the luciferic principle. It's it, it sort of it pushed life forward,
mm.
but when it hits that, when it hits its final maturation point, life, that is, the
Yeah.
tree, when it hits the zenith, it must always fall, right?
Mm,
So it's, again, as we've been speaking of, the luciferic principle, what they seek, this idea of Lucifer, is they are the Luciferian spirit,
mm,
because in essence they're attempting to outrun death, as we've been speaking about, right? Everything they're doing, it's a fear, it's a drive, it's driven by fear. They seek to outrun death. That's essentially it. And that's what Lucifer saw. In fact, if you look in the precursor, a Promethean story from the Greek mythos, you see the same thing, where he steals the fire of Olympus, Prometheus, that is. I believe he was a Titan, and he tries to run away from the gods after he provides that fire to man, and then he's chained to, I believe it's Mount. Oh God, I forget the name of it now. It's a mountain in the Caucasus. He's
mm,
chained to that by Zeus,
mm.
and what happens is, every day, a eagle, or either an eagle or a raven, comes down
Yeah.
and feasts upon his entrails.
Yeah.
All that pain, that death, right? That life leading to pain and death. Then he, as night falls, he then rejuvenates, and he goes through it all over and all over again, right? It's that
Mm,
idea of life and death, the cycle, that
mm,
Prometheus can never escape it, that Lucifer can never escape, right? That
mm,
in many ways we are. Unfortunately, we are the sort of light bearer, right?
mm,
Um, or they are more acutely, right? They really desire to outrun death. I mean, that's what the Homo Deus is about.
mm,
It's they actually seek to become God, where they become the seed, as opposed to just the tree, right, and the roots.
mm,
They
mm,
want to become the seed. They want to become the singularity point. They want to control both life and death, and keep it in a constant sort of harmony, so they never
mm.
die. As opposed to, say, actually riding the wave of the volatility of life and death and renewal. If I hope that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah.
That's
Like I'm understanding
uh,
Lucifer now as he's a cog in the machine of it all. Like he's
yeah.
part of the emanation.
Yeah, it's a description of the behavior of the system. Absolutely, a cog in it. Yeah, an archetype. It's an archetypal they're all archetypal forces,
Yeah.
and they possess man, because man, because he's a fractal essence of the divine, contains all of these forces within himself.
Yeah.
Hence why Shakespeare stated, "All the world is a stage, and we act."
Yeah.
Each man. Um, has 7 acts to his life, and he plays many parts throughout them, right? It's, I mean, what he's ultimately talking about is that we play these archetypal forces, um, what seems to be our own choice, what seems to be our own decisions, really are not. They're mere. It's all illusion. We're instruments of a greater force that acts through us.
Mm.
Um,
But just sorry
mhm.
to labor the point, like, but I'm still trying to get can Lucifer? Can you give one more example of what the luciferic energy is, like as in creation? What is any short example of it, just that I might use for reference, get my head around it.
Um, Really, it exists most pronouncedly within humanity. So, one example would be, for example, well, you have the Homo Deus, of course. You have
I- is
even for example AI.
Yeah.
AI, right? For example, you have AI, and the way they seek to utilize AI would
Mm,
be to use it to, in essence, become an undead husk of
yeah.
humanity, to thus have the, a sort of latent potential of both life and death in
Mm,
itself, but to utilize that undead husk to get around the sort of, again, as I've just stated, the cosmos acting vicariously through man, right? So if
so
you, their belief
I
is
could
if you have something outside of that, you know, it can sort of escape the sort of death, the rebirth, life
oh, okay.
cycle.
So
Hmm.
perhaps the luciferic energy is like a fire that exists on its own outside of death, but is part of the system. In the normative sense, it ties in with death,
Yes.
but by itself, it's infinitely struggling to exist outside of death. If you just took it out of the component and looked at
Absolutely.
it on its own on the table,
Yeah.
it's striving for infinite existence.
God
Um,
is a what's termed a proarchy, which
right.
means it existed before, or it didn't exist. It was there before the beginning, right?
Yeah. Mm,
And then God's, or pure potential undifferentiated and unmanifested, it self-divided.
mm,
Its essence is thought or consciousness always seeks to do, because it's a reactive substance. Therefore, if it's got nothing else to react to, it reacts to itself, or something along those lines. Then came the beginning, which is the end. So the beginning and the end, or the alpha and omega, then came about, right? That Y principle, right?
mm,
Or literally the seed breaking apart, and the shoot, the two bifurcated shoots of
mm,
potential, then going forward from that, and then
mm.
all bifurcations or points of the junctures of growth of the tree and the root system then continue upwards, right? And that's what creates time and space, and what have you, to visualize it like that. So.
But
Mhm.
it's a Christian term, is it? An Abrahamic term, Lucifer.
I
Or
believe it is. No, it's no, Judaism has a similar word. I forget it now. I forget the noun, but
so there's
Judaism
probably
has a
a
similar
similar
concept.
archetype going way back into back through the
Yes,
different
that's Sam Yaza.
mythology.
Sam Yaza. That's that. If you read the Book of Enoch, Sam Yaza or Sam, though that's taken on a totally different dimension within the Zohar. But Sam Yaza within the Book of Enoch, that is literally, that is the sort of the rebellious angel, right? The fallen angel, the luciferic idea. And funnily enough, within the Book of Enoch, um, he takes, I believe it's 200 angels with him. Right? Again, these are all
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
forces, elemental forces. He takes them with him and brings them to his sort of rebellious side. But he states he provided for them, or he stated to them to give themselves over to him in loyalty, and they all spoke oaths, in which they stated if we, if we are disloyal to you, Samyaza, we are to be cursed for all eternity and all of this. And I forget the term is utilized now, but it's a sort of oath of death, right? Now, it states within the Book of Enoch that is where the secret societies all got their founding from. This sort of secret society of Samyaza, which is interesting to say the least. But again, that's a sort of luciferic idea
Samyaza.
within
So
Sam. Mhm.
yeah, so the luciferic essence or fire is, it's kind of a life force that wants to become a god in of its own right. Like it's so energized that it automatically seeks to sort of
Yeah,
to explode out of itself and become its own god. But it's
that's it. Yeah,
self-contained. It's like a battery you never have to recharge. It sits there within the system,
yeah,
and it's in the normative sense. It's in the wheel with death and rebirth and all, and it sits there like a component
yeah.
on the board. But if you removed it up out of the board and just looked at it on its own, it's constantly trying to explode into something, into its own sort of actualization of like godhood kind of thing. So it's a force of nature that's meant to be within the bigger system, but that it's coveted by, as you say, from a position of fear of death. It's coveted as an end in itself that should be worshipped and maintained and, how do you say, contracted with,
Mm-hmm.
because it would seem to offer the release from the natural cycle, or seems to promise to do that.
Here's an
So the
example of. Oh, sorry, Zeal. Finish your
No,
point.
no,
I
go on.
do
No, I'm just
apologize.
trying to roughly get my head around it and ask you, am I in the right ballpark there?
No, you're totally correct. An idea of it, and you're totally correct. It's in essence, it's a cog in the machine. It's
Mm,
merely a process. See, this is the thing as we see right now, right? The Faustian archetype is luciferic, right?
yeah,
And that's the word in Judaism, the term Yetzer Hara or Yetzirah, which
yeah,
literally means the evil inclination. Now, that idea, as you're stating, it's attempting to become the creator. But the problem is, or not the problem, the way that is utilized within the system, the machine, is a sort of a psycho-spiritual cog, right? It, when we see the growth and the junctures of growth, meaning the bifurcation, right? The Lichtenberg pattern, the energetic trajectory of electricity, or you see it within the bronchial system, the roots of trees, as I've mentioned, the branches of trees.
mm,
You see where it's that Y principle. It hits a point of growth, then it bifurcates into two branches, right? Or two stems. And then it does it again, and so on and so forth, till it hits our zenith, and then the tree dies, right? Or it stops growing. Now, that bifurcation is the luciferic principle, right? It's the Yetzer Hara, it's the evil inclination, right? It's that point, it's the Faustian archetype. It's the hubris of man pushing for, or the hubris of just of evil, pushing forward the light, pushing forward life itself.
mm,
Um, then it will hit a point of self ruin. Then it will bifurcate. Then those two individual branches themselves will then push forward luciferically or what have you. Then it will then it will hit that juncture of growth of self ruin. Then it will bifurcate again, right? And so on and so forth to its maturation or the zenith of life. Then it will stop growing. Then eventually it will die, right? And be subsumed. As Georges Bataille states, le solaire, no, l'anus solaire, or literally the solar anus, right? I know a terrible term, but that's the way he describes it. You can
Well,
think of it as the black sun as well. And then it, death creates new life and so on and so forth. But
that's something I
the,
wanted to ask you about as well. The black
mm,
sun or the black hole sun or the solar anus, pardon the
yeah,
expression. But like, what is that a reference to death as such, or is there some deeper
yeah.
occult?
Well, essentially, it is death. It's thinking of the entire natural world, both the heavens and the earth, as a sort of body, right?
Mm,
That's it's in a constant sort of toroidal filtration, if that makes sense. So, for example, within the toroid field, of course, it's circular or semicircular within the two hemispheres. Within the center, you have the toroidal funnel in many ways. At the top of that, as George Bataille states, you have the sun or the solar energy, the dawn, if you were to think of it like that. You can
mm,
also find that as Aries
mm,
upon the zodiacal wheel. That's the point of birth, right? Then it goes through the process of life. Then it goes through the anus, the solar anus, if you will, or the black sun, right?
mm,
It's excreted out through that sort of excretion. I'm being very broad here, but through that excretion is does the body then from death is the potential for life
mm,
sort of infused into the, if you were to think of it in Kabbalah, the Malkuth. So it's into the dirt, into the black dirt goes the seedbed of or the potential for life once more, the waste, right? And it's this idea, and you can think of he talks about this. So he mentioned. So of course he's talking about the toroidal field there because he discusses the rotational growth and waste cycle, right? Or birth and waste cycle, or birth and death cycle, rather. Um, and it goes round, it's rotational, right? It's circular. Um, he also discusses the tides. He uses that as an analogy as well. That idea that the sun inseminates the deep waters, and so does the moon as well, and it makes the tides go, right? And it also the sun infuses its energy right into the water, and through the coitus, the coital movement, the coital gyrations, sort of sexual gyrations of the tides, he states,
mm,
is then birthed fish, and then through evolution is then birthed mammals and what have you, and all of this. Um, so it really he ties sex and death together. He states
mm,
that sex is an actual process of death as opposed to just life. Um, he also mentions other things. Um, yes, he states that the solar energy is almost like the semen,
mm,
and the deep water, the tide, is akin to the womb, right? It's akin, and of course, when again he gets into this within the book, but not to be morbid or sick or anything, but he states that when the solar energy penetrates, or the phallus penetrates the vagina, the female genitalia, um, there's a sort of watery substance that's created, of course, lubricant. And, so he ties all of this together, basically tying the coitus, the sexual reproductive act with astronomy. So again, like
mm,
the macrocosm and the microcosm are
mm,
found, are reflections of one another, rather.
mm.
And he ties all of this together and essentially is discussing what we're discussing right now. I will say, though, George Bataille puts it in a rather colourful way, to be very polite about it. I wouldn't
Yeah.
put it, I wouldn't describe it in the manner he describes it as, describes
Well,
it within, but it's,
Jesus Christ. Well, just I want to touch on
mm,
that very briefly. I don't want to hold you up much longer, but like
yeah,
the obsession, this constant reference to black hole sun and black sun. like in National Socialism, seemingly, and even the
Mhm.
mythos around National Socialism and Bataille and co. Is it? I'm just even to get a. Is it a reference to death or to that energy, as you were saying? That what's the Hebrew term you used? The
Well,
dirt or the
oh, Malkuth. Yeah, the kingdom.
Malkuth.
Yeah.
But why such
Mm.
seeming obsession with that particular, with the Malkuth, with the excretion, with the, you know,
Be,
is there some secret in it, like, or something?
yes,
Is there
because
some?
if you basically what George Bataille's getting at there, and a few commentators, people that have reviewed his work, especially the Solar Anus, right? I mean, he's got a theory of religion as well, which is quite interesting. But uh, several of his works are interesting. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he's an absolute madman. The way he describes things is, it's not really. I don't really like his literature. I think it's fairly perverse. But anyway,
Well, this is the point, you see,
mm,
because sorry to cut across you.
no, sorry.
The perversion is a kind of a Sabbatean, perhaps, influence, or that which is on the margin. There's a sort of a, if one finds oneself as a cast off of nature,
Yes,
then one hits into this kind of self hatred
that's it.
trajectory, and there's an implosion of the self
Yeah,
and the
that's it.
ego. Then, at the moment of self destruction, the ego decides, no, hang on a second, I'm not going to die. I'm actually
That's
God.
it.
I just got it
Yes,
all wrong. I'm actually God,
that's it.
and it finds redemption
And
in
nihilism. Yeah,
yeah, and in excretion and in
yeah.
feces. It creates a fecal idol, and it begins to worship it as a high aspect of creation, perhaps, and it
Mm,
warps its own. It goes back into that kind of a chaotic void where, you know things are not, depending on how you look at stuff.
yeah.
And it finds redemption in that. That's why I think it's this.
Oh no, you're totally correct. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's what you get into. You stated that isn't this very dangerous because it could lead to nihilism, and
yeah,
you're
I
totally
suppose.
correct. But it only leads to nihilism, like what you stated, if you do not. It's not really about destroying the self, right? Because you can't. You need to have the self to exist within this world. But it's about controlling the self. But what they've done is they've not even destroyed the self. I mean, they've literally they've been led into nihilism, right? You can see that within, of course, they're into spirit cooking and all of this, right? But
Mm,
look at Podesta, look at the paintings that he buys, right?
mm, mm,
It's totally twisted stuff. He's got a
mm.
sculpture of one of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims, right? And you're,
Well,
again, it's that idea, right? Even Marina Abramovich, she
yeah,
is
yeah.
total insanity. It's
Mm,
because they've stared into the abyss, and unfortunately, the abyss has sort of stared back at them. And there's been a realization there in their mind that, well, if everything is abyssal, right? And
mm,
of course, they hubristically believe they've destroyed themselves, the self, right? Unfortunately, they haven't. They've merely just distillated it, right?
mm,
They've distilled it, rather.
mm,
They've made it more potent,
mm,
fermented it in many ways. So unfortunately, what you're seeing is the outgrowth of that, which is the sort of luciferic principle. It's how you produce growth. It's how you produce that juncture of growth through self ruin. Hence, why you need the Faustian archetype. But uh, what was your initial question? Sorry, you
I've
had a.
I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember, because I kind of following the trajectory. I'm trying to get my head around, like, as you say there, the
Mm.
implosion.
Oh yes,
That
sorry.
yeah.
This idea of the Malkuth and the waste, and what's the importance of that? It's because and some of the commentators mention this on George Bataille, that this idea of the black sun, if you understand how death and life fit together, and that death and violence or self-division is at the center of it all, meaning that fire, right? The fire is at the center of it all, that which gives life and also takes life away, right? Is, if you understand that, if you can control that, you can escape the box, right? The idea of the box, you can escape it. And I mean, all of the various mystery religions are about this. Everyone. This is why Masonry is so, it's all about the square and the compass, right? Or the circle and the square. How do you square the circle, right? It's that idea, right? That's the black sun. That's, or as David Bowie stated, the black star. He believes himself to have become the black star, right? And in a deeper esoteric manner, squaring the circle is essentially, how do I, that which is trapped inside the box, this higher divine essence, this fractal of the of God, right, or whatever term we want to use, this force of pure potential. How do I escape from the box, from the void? You know, how do I control my, a new box? You can see that within the symbol of the magnum opus, where it's two circles, two concentric circles with the symbol of the generative symbol, the triangle with, I believe that's outside of the square, and then inside of that is another circle. So it's, in many ways, geometrically.
That's mad stuff, man.
Yeah, it's that idea of controlling, of, getting beyond the box, thinking outside the box, squaring the circle, right?
But is
This idea.
the logical conclusion of that like to literally escape?
No, they
No.
believe it is. But
Oh,
again, this goes to the luciferic principle, why it's needed, why the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, this is why evil is needed. Because again, like the tree, you need that point of self-ruin which permits the Y principle, or bifurcation, permits new growth. So you need them
yeah.
to destroy themselves so existence can then persist. This is the conundrum. I mean, you can't, do you know what I'm saying? You can't
Yeah.
stop it would be to stop existence.
Yeah.
You can't stop the motion, or that which has been set into motion. It's
When you say the bifurcation,
mm,
is one line of that is a continuum, and what is the other line, the other point of the Y, the other arm of the Y? Is that the destruction, or is it? How do you, like? I'm trying to account for that
so
moment where something splits and one is constructive, one is destructive.
think of it like what happened during the sort of needlecraft event, right?
Mm,
Where
mm,
you had one section of the society who valued life and valued thinking,
mm,
um, moving in one direction, and the other
mm.
moving in the other direction, right? So
Okay,
one
yeah, yeah.
is inherently, destructive. One is life, one is death. But think of it even, so the monad isn't one thing, right?
Mm,
You don't just have one monad. The monad is at every pot. So think of it like the lightning bolt, right? Which you also see within the Sephiroth, which is the pathway of the Sephiroth, this lightning bolt, right? That
yeah.
when the lightning bolt hits one of the vessels or one of the points, it then corrects along an axis, an upward axis, right? Then it descends down again. Then it corrects. Then it
Mm,
descends down again. Then it corrects. Then it descends down again, right? So,
mm.
in essence, that idea of the bifurcation is, it's not necessarily a bifurcation. It's the point where life and death manage to diverge once again. There's a sort of
Oh, okay,
equilibrium state. There's a balance that's been found again. Then it
okay.
diverges, and then, of course,
Feedback,
you have a
as your
feedback.
man says.
That's the perfect word, yeah. Feedback.
Yeah,
So a
yeah,
control mechanism. The
yeah.
Faustian, the luciferic principle, the Faustian archetype, what we're seeing now with Harari, Klaus Schwab, this entire clique that's based on Kabbalah, that they don't realize it, or maybe they do, but they are a control function, a control mechanism for existence itself. So they
So
are destined to
the
ruin.
Faustian thing is you're making the deal with your man, but the future outcome is that part of it ends up in destruction, and the pure part continues.
Yes, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
the devil, in that sense, either as we see through the Old Testament, the devil is in constant cahoots with Yahweh, right?
Behind the
I mean,
scenes.
behind the scenes, yeah. Even this idea of the angel of destruction
I mean,
is
that's
in,
the ultimate conspiracy theory.
well,
You
yeah.
know, the
Well,
devil.
the devil is God, or
Oh
the
yeah,
devil
yeah,
is the
yeah, yeah.
Of course, Yahweh is one could say he is the devil, but there's a lot of overlap. But in
Yeah,
many
yeah.
ways, the devil is
Sorry, I
God.
got a bit confused there. Sorry, it's
God
not
and the devil are the same thing
in
because
the Abrahamic thing.
yes, but
Yeah.
even if to think of the good and the evil, I mean, you need one to have the other, and vice versa.
So as
I
you
mean,
said, they are in cahoots, even above Yahweh. If you were to take
yeah,
God with capital G, the main man, top dog of all, he is ultimately, eventually, in cahoots, as you said, with the devil. Eventually,
yes,
at
to
some point,
think of it like that, yeah, yeah. Well,
because
even
they're in a symbiotic kind of
that's it.
relationship at some point.
That's
Like,
it. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
it's that idea of you know what? I believe it's in Sherlock Holmes. Sorry, I won't keep you much longer, man.
yeah,
And when the unstoppable force meets the immovable object, what
yeah.
happens?
What happens?
And
Yeah, yeah,
I remember answering that to Reagan. I said, life happens, right?
yeah,
Existence happens because the immovable object is only understood to be immovable because the unstoppable force hits it, and vice versa with the unstoppable force and the immovable object, right?
yeah,
And that paradox, or mutually complementary paradox in that sense, is what maintains that incessant mystery of that question. Or if we
yeah,
extrapolate that out to nature, the incessant mystery of nature, right? That
yeah,
people can't understand that the paradox is complementary, that
yeah,
it just is. And you
yeah,
know that's not I'm not getting out of the sort of mystery of all, just saying, well, it just is. I'm just saying
yeah,
it really just is. Um and in that
yeah.
sense it's a sort of liberating principle because you're not like the Faustian archetype. You're not like Harari and Klaus Schwab, where you're thinking, how do I escape death? Right?
Mm,
You understand that you're riding the wave. You're like a surfer. And yeah, of course, sometimes you're going to get dragged under by the waves, but then sometimes you're going to be riding high, and it's just eternal, and it just is, and it always will be, because the beginning is the end. So, when I say the beginning is the end, when pre-beginning, when it's self-divided, and that point was essentially a system of autopoiesis generated, where the beginning is the end, meaning that life and death are entwined, good and evil are entwined, and it's a constant a controlled
being
oscillation
co.
between the two. Yeah,
Mm,
you're oscillating constantly between the two like a ping pong ball. Um, and when it ends, it will just begin once again, because the pure potential undifferentiated and unmanifested is inherently reactive. It must be, because look at us, look at our life. We are constantly reacting with one another. We're in constant conflict. Our hearts, our very heart, which beats, is in constant conflict with itself. It contracts, then beats, contracts, beats, contracts, beats. You know,
mm,
so
mm,
it's contracting, it's expanding, contracting, expand. It's literally a microcosm of the grander macrocosmic cycles,
mm, mm.
and that's the mystery of it all. And that's at the heart of the conspiracy. People say to me, why do you speak about this all the time? Well, because if you don't understand this, you don't really you'll feel like an ant within a nest. To steal
Yeah,
Preparata's words. You'll feel
yeah,
like the ant within the nest. If you don't understand it from a higher vantage point, you
yeah,
won't see that what they're doing is absolute folly, and it has to be for them to then destroy themselves and continue existence. And of course, I'm not denying I may be destroyed along with them, but that's the way of the world. It's just,
yeah,
you know, we
yeah, yeah.
we the only thing that's certain is certain death. Do you know? It's
And
unfortunate.
certain rebirth.
And certain rebirth. Absolutely. It's that idea of the solar anus, light, birth, life, death, the zodiacal wheel. I mean, it's very basic principles, but um, yeah, it's entwined in everything, unfortunately. But yeah, that's the
But
sort of
the autopoiesis of the system that they desire is a luciferic concept. Is it correct to say?
yes, the artificial autopoiesis of the system that they require is luciferic, but fundamentally they're luciferic because they permit growth through their self-destruction. Through their self-destructive actions, do they permit growth?
Okay, yeah,
A
yeah,
bit like
yeah, yeah.
Prometheus taking the fire of the Olympians down to man. Through that self-destructive act, by giving
But
fire to
do we
humans,
understand the
they-
luciferic force then as something which destroys with a view to,
to
you know,
rebirth. Yeah.
yeah, is that correct to say that?
So
The
similar to
luciferic.
similar to Araman.
Yeah.
Araman does a similar thing.
Mm.
I don't think Steiner would see it that way, but I would. Um, I would. But yeah.
Anyway, you blow my mind, man. You have some fucking hell. You have some. Talking to you is like taking a trip. It's like your mind just. You have an uncanny fucking capacity to understand those things. It's very, very, very difficult concepts. Very like you have some rare gift there, man. Definitely, like rare, rare gift. Like
No, no, I'm just
oh,
a
I hope
just a
you.
stupid construction labourer, man.
Fuck off, fuck off. Don't give me that shit, man. No, you definitely have. My 2 cents on it anyway. It's my own personal thing. I think there's something in you there with that Cohen thing, that crowd that belonged to you that came to London, or maybe it's the Scottish Celtic thing. Who knows? You could have a druidic. There's some meeting of forces in you, like, but you have a very rare, uncanny gift there, like. I hope you'll always write and speak and have an interest in those areas, like, because I definitely don't know anyone who has a mind anywhere like what you have. It's just a fucking very rare thing, I think.
Oh well,
Anyway,
I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that.
I, d- I hope you don't feel encumbered by it, or I'm not trying to say. I just, there's, I don't know anyone who would have those kinds of the capacity to digest or analyze or impart information like that, or that kind of understanding of those complex, you know, forces and energies and all those kinds of things. It's very great there you talk, man.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. And no, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. I mean,
Yeah.
I find what you have to say. It's very interesting, especially your take on algocracy and even the sort of technocratic structure of it all. I think it's
Well,
extremely interesting, your insights.
thanks, but like it just, I don't know. It's talking to you, the whole thing falls apart because I feel like it's just, it's like you hit a fucking button and you blast it way out into space, time somewhere, sitting out in a fucking star, way out, and way out. Like, and it's like Jesus, what was I on about? Because it's like fucking hell. I've forgotten about this side of things, and it's like, you know what I mean? It's like puts everything into it, as you say, no longer feel like an ant because you get a you just have whatever capacity you have. You definitely have something very potent, like very powerful fucking mind. Really, I think. I dare say there must be something alive in you that goes back a long, long way. Dare say, some spirit in your DNA or something. Anyway,
Perhaps. I don't know. I
but
don't.
you don't necessarily put much mass on it yourself, I suppose. Really, do you? You don't seem to. You're quite humble and.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's just ideas that I have. To me, it's
All
I
fairly
just,
logical. It's like saying you're going for a bag of
yeah,
chips or something.
yeah, pretty much, yeah. I just like thinking about these things.
I just,
Hey,
I,
I like speaking to you about them as well. I mean,
well, you see, I suppose
mm,
certain people have talents. You could meet like a talented guitar player or golfer or I don't know, in anything, and some people just have a certain talent for something, and in every other capacity, they're perfectly ordinary. They just seem to have a fucking talent for a given thing. So I think you're one of those kinds of people. I think you just have a talent, a certain talent, like for this type of thing. It's
I'll
your mind, really, how you understand it, like, and it's just a
t-
fucking
tell
natural
you,
thing.
I'll tell you a funny story. So just before you go, sorry to
Mm.
keep you,
Oh,
but this is hilarious. Um, so my employer, he's a mason, and he's a worshipful master of the lodge, and I believe he's actually quite. I think he's beyond the third degree. Just recently, he was over in Frankfurt. He was doing a tour of these Masonic lodges throughout, the continental Europe. So he went to Frankfurt first, which is, extremely interesting given the history of Frankfurt, as it's, as it ties in or relates to this conspiracy. And then he went to Denmark and Hamburg and a few other areas, I believe in the Netherlands. Now he just came back there on, was it the Monday or the Tuesday, back to Scotland. So his son-in-law, who we work with, he's a joiner. He is also a mason as well. He's a fourth degree, I believe. But I was having a laugh with him. I was saying about I said, so the third degree ritual, what can you tell me about that? He says, I can't tell you nothing. I says, well, you played Hiram a Biff, didn't you? You play Hiram a Biff. And he started laughing, but didn't say anything. I said, so where did you get struck? Oh, I can't tell you that. I said, well, it was the back of the head, the knee,
yeah,
and the forehead. Then I went into obviously the symbolic reasons for that, and how it ties in with Hinduism, the subtle body, that concept, and all of this. Well, anyway, the day after, I told them about I'm writing a book and all, several books and all of these things, esoteric, and he comes back the next day. He says, I mentioned to the employer,
yeah,
who's the lodge master, who was over in Frankfurt and all that. I mentioned to him about your book and all of that, and he said, we'll get you the form to join,
yeah,
and I'll first you, and he'll second you, right, to join.
yeah.
And I said no, because as soon as I'm in that organization, I can no longer speak about these things. I can no longer speak about any of this, and it, it's similar to Socrates. Socrates never joined any. Plato did, his student, but Socrates never joined any of these various mystery schools because he really understood it without having to join and go through the initiations.
Well, see, if it didn't, like, there's a thing for basically, like, you'd be like a double agent in there, kind of thing, because the benefit would be to understand, like, you'd learn a lot about society and how people work and the way things
Hmm.
go. Perhaps, but I'm guessing you would. It'd be an interesting experiment in of itself. But then, as you say, you take the oath. But there's ways around everything. Like, which I suppose it'd be very interesting in lots of ways because you'd be getting an insight potentially into how things work in business in Scotland, who's involved. A lot of those guys probably wouldn't understand a lot of anywhere near what you would understand with regard to the relationship of forces and the meaning behind various things. But like I'd say, you already have, like, you're not one of them in inverted commas, but you're already way up the food chain in terms of what you know, if you know what I mean. But it would be, you know, it's a weird one. Like, I'd like to tell you, go fucking go for it, man. See what you can get out of it. Like, let us know back at the ranch. But like, whether you could still maintain your pseudonym, your nom de guerre, that would that afford you some degree of freedom? But then you'd be worrying that you'd step on someone's toes in there, and someone would get to know about you and realize, this guy needs to, fuck, we need to sit on this guy because he's, you know what I mean, he's too fucking, like, if you told him you were Jewish, part Jewish, you were Cohen, uh, this is your essentially teaching, because you gave it to them. Your, but it would be very interesting. But as you say,
Well, if it would be interesting, absolutely, yeah, it would be
but like, what
interesting to
if,
join.
how does it work? You make some sort of a spiritual allegiance to some fucking dark force.
Well, it's the Grand Architect of the unit. It's the Lord of the Duat at that point. You'd be making an oath to him.
Like, can you keep your fingers crossed or something?
Well, personally, I spit on that, demiurgic force,
But
but
can you subvert a subversive organization? Can you go in hiding in there? What could you get from? Like, you can imagine if you spent 10 years in that fucking thing, what you would learn.
mm.
And those fuckers have serious context.
Oh no, they do. Well, I'll give you an example. So, just really quickly. So, in that same lodge, God, I won't give away the number of the lodge, but
Don't.
there was this individual. Now, he was a concrete finisher, and prior to that, he worked as a trolley boy in Asda. And after a year being in this Masonic lodge, he worked his way up. I believe he became a master of the lodge, and went on to do other degrees. So I believe after the third degree, you have to go to various other, uh, you know, sort of extra lodge or extracurricular, um, do extracurricular degrees to get higher up the food chain. Well, he went and did all of this, right? And he was very loyal, and he became, fortuitously, a Church of Scotland minister, very high up, right? Now remember, this guy was a trolley boy a year prior, right? And a concrete finisher. So, and then he becomes a Church of Minister, a minister of the Church of Scotland. And I believe 2 years ago he was charged with corruption, bribery and taking backhanders, the brown envelope, as they say. Well, just recently, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, he's just been cleared of all those charges, even though the the, uh, the evidence, the body of evidence against him was totally against him. And we were asking that son-in-law about this case, and he said he was just too well connected, way too well connected.
Mm,
And
mm,
yeah, and basically what they did was they
to
just
get
let
done.
it peter out in terms of the media and the public consciousness. They just let it peter out. They let people forget about it, then they dismiss the case. That's what they do all the time. So, I mean,
Oh, lovely.
that's. They say the Masons don't have a lot of power. They certainly do. They still do. All of these various secret societies do, because they're all, again, a
Yeah.
nexus of secret societies. Masonry is merely a sort of
Yeah.
compartmentalized form of it.
You'd perhaps think that they're not as powerful, as like they've outlived their functionality. They are. Yeah, 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 yeah. It'd be an interesting one. I'd only be worried myself if, like, it's all Boy Scouts until you have to do something, or somebody's got something on you, or you know what I mean, and then it suddenly is not fun anymore.
Absolutely, man. War is a great camouflage for death, as we're going to see with this global conflict coming into view with the needlecraft thing. So that'll be the coming global conflict will be used as a camouflage for this needlecraft event that just occurred. I mean, I'll give you an example. My girlfriend's stepfather, he has just got out of hospital. So he took a heart attack, I believe, 2 weeks after his, what was it, fourth or fifth needlecraft or something like that. Or how many ever it was. I believe he got also the flu as well. So the flu needlecraft, just using code words here. He was just in hospital. His heart rate was tremendously high, and they couldn't figure out what the hell was wrong with him. So they mentioned, you had food poisoning. Now, when have you ever heard food poisoning putting your heart rate at, I believe it was something like 180 BPM?
What they had the deaths on between 18 to 23-year-olds here are up 20% last year. And I'll leave you on this one. The excuse they came up with was that they're no longer going on death certs, that they now go on. There's a website, right, called RIP.ie. And so if you're unlucky enough, someone dies belong to you, the first thing people do is they go to this a privately run website and they say, look, Auntie Nora has died. Can you put up her death thing? And the funeral will be this Sunday at such and such church. So at the state statistical office, instead of going on a death cert, which is a legal document to record, have now decided to, this is their excuse, go to a private website to get the deaths. And that's why they're saying that the numbers are up 20 fucking percent. What wicked bullshit, like. Anyway, I better let you go, man.